Hello, my name is Maddie Hooper, and today I will be discussing the history of the genetic engineering of the soybean and provide positive and negative impacts of genetically modifying this organism. I will also discuss the gene patents in the industry and the effects these patents have on the farming industry. Why are soybeans so important that we have to modify them? Well, historically, soybeans were originated from Southeast Asia and were domesticated in China around 1100 BC. Soybeans are an important global source of protein and oil. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, the United States is the world's largest soybean producer and the second largest soybean exporter. According to the NC Soy Producer Association, a single soybean is 18% oil and 38% protein. Since the soybean is so high in protein, it is a major ingredient in livestock feed for meat industries. Poultry, swine, and cattle industries are major consumers. Soybeans are also mass-produced for the oil it contains. In the United States, soybeans make up 90% of the oilseed production. Processed soybeans are the world's second largest source of vegetable oil. Not only is the oil in the soybean used for cooking purposes, but oil in the soybeans are also extracted from biodiesel production. Soybean is produced for human consumption as well. Humans consume soy and products such as soy milk, soy flour, and soy protein. Since soybeans are common in everyday uses, critics of genetically modified foods are starting to question the mass production of this crop. There could be allergic reactions, changes to the liver, and fertility issues due to the genetic engineering of the soybean. Also, the mass production is having serious ecological damage with the overusage of herbicides. Critics also discuss how the gene patents of the soybean are starting to negatively affect traditional farming practices. So, before we get into the positive and negative effects, let's first review what genetic engineering is and one genetic modification to the soybean. So, first off, genetic engineering is the modification of characteristics of an organism by manipulating its gene material. Scientists discovered that they can modify agriculturally significant organisms in a precise and rapid way. With genetic modification of organisms, in the agricultural business, productivity increased, pesticide usage decreased, and enhances in a flavor nutrition were developed. One main gene modification for soybeans was the resistance to herbicides. This genetic modification of the resistance of herbicides is considered to be transgenic. In genetic engineering, transgenic means that the genes that were transferred were between unrelated species. Soybeans are considered Roundup-ready crops, which are tolerant to the herbicide glyphosate. Glyphosate is a synthetic compound which uses non-selective systemic herbicide, which is also effective against weeds. Glyphosate was first discovered in the 1970s by chemist John Fraz. The glyphosate tolerance was created in 1996 and was obtained through the expression of the EPSPS gene using Agrobacterium strand of CP4. Agrobacterium is a method of genetically modifying organisms. Using Agrobacterium, a gene is inserted into a plasmid using a restriction enzyme and DNA lysage. In this case, the EPSPS enzyme meets the plant's need for the aromatic amino acids and other metabolites that are essential for the plant's development and growth of glyphosate. The second generation of Roundup-ready soybean was found to produce identical CP4 EPSPS proteins. However, it had a larger yield advantage compared with the first and the same elite genetic background. This was because the second generation was more tolerant or more resistant to the weeds, making the yield larger. 9 years later, in 2005, glyphosate-tolerant soybeans constituted a massive 87% of just the soybean area. The Roundup Ready soybean launched in 1996 and were patented. The purpose of the patent system is to give innovators a period of exclusivity for commercial product development of products, which encourages innovation. Patents rights were novel inventions that were authorized under the U.S. Constitution. Plant patents have a patent term of 20 years from initial filing, so GMO patents protect the market for about 15 to 20 years after the time of the product development. The core patents of Roundup Ready soybeans expired between the years of 2011 and 2014. Once the patents expire, the innovation becomes public knowledge, which other companies, farmers, and parties of interest have free access to. Utility patents have several advantages over plant patents. Utility patents cover innovation beyond plants. For example, if a GMO involves integration of a novel, such as foreign DNA from a plant genome, the uniquely designed DNA is also protected under the utility patent, and vice versa, it would not be protected under the plant patent. For farmers, the patented technology will undoubtedly mean a greater dependence on the commercial seed market and a fundamental loss of control of germplasm. Roundup Ready forbids farmers from saving or reusing the company's patented seed. Monsanto, the owner of Roundup Ready crops and Roundup Ready soybeans, has aggressively enforced its patents on transgenic soybeans and taken legal action against over 100 soybean growers who have violated the licensing agreement. If widely utilized, the farmers will lose their age-old right to save a seed of their harvest. So let's talk about the positive impacts of this genetic modification. So the major positive impact of the genetic modification was that technology allowed the over-the-top spraying of the genetically modified crops with these specific broad-spectrum herbicides. These herbicides target both grass and broad-level weeds, but do not harm the crop itself. Glyphosate-tolerant soybeans have enabled weed management practice to improve yield and profitability. Also, the glyphosate-tolerant soybeans allows farmers to be more flexible with timing than required conventional herbicides. The American Soybean Association states that the glyphosate-tolerant soybean protects the environment through the changes of tillage practices and herbicide application, and it has improved weed control. The management of weeds ensures soybean health and provide long-term reduced fuel use, erosion management, and improved soil conditions. Well, why are seeds so bad to plants that they need managing? Weeds force crops like corn and soybeans to compete for sunlight and nutrients. If crops are competing for weeds, the yield for crops will be less the more weeds there are. Weed control is also the most expensive area in the farming operation. So, crops like the glyphosate-tolerant soybeans, for example, can survive being sprayed by herbicides, and it can help farmers be economically stable. Because of the effective weed control, farmers can now adopt new conservation tillages. Instead of plowing the fields after every year, farmers can now leave previous year's soybean settles before and after planting to reduce soil erosion and increase soil quality. This also has led to reductions in environmental degradation, such as surface water contamination from sediment and other nutrients. The production of soybeans grows rapidly every year due to how much we use soybeans in our society. Because of the constant need for soybeans, more herbicide is needed and used worldwide. However, because of the more use of herbicides, weeds have been slowly developing resistance to this herbicide. As history shows, when growers repeatedly use the same mechanisms over and over, selection pressure for evolution of resistance builds. The glyphosate tolerance is not only used on soybeans, but other crops such as corn, cotton, and canola. All of these crops, including soybeans, have millions of acres and have relied exclusively on glyphosate for weed control for over the past 5 to 8 years. With this kind of intense selection pressure, widespread resistance of glyphosate is inevitable. Although the resistance in many cases has evolved over multiple evolutionary events, there is also a likelihood of resistance mobility spread through pollen, seeds, and the weeds itself, whether that's through weathering, the wind, etc. Due to the emergence of weeds becoming resistant to glyphosate, such as the water hemp weed, farmers are slowly going back to using residual products to soybeans. Unfortunately, there is not any other solutions to fix weeds that are becoming resistant to glyphosate at this time. After reading several research articles and review articles on glyphosate in the production of soybeans, it is obvious that the human race relies very heavily on the soybean production. Soybeans are what we use to feed livestock, to help us cook, and for our own consumption. Because of the high demand of soybeans, scientists like John Frass back in the 70s created genetically modified crops to help increase yield and productivity. Through these modifications, I believe the most impactful for the soybean was the creation of the patented glyphosate-tolerant soybean, also known as the Roundup Ready soybean. These crops are resistant to herbicides that could harm them, are resistant to the herbicide glyphosate that could harm them. However, the glyphosate herbicide helps kill weeds, which allows more soybeans and other crops with this gene to be harvested. Farmers use glyphosate-tolerant soybeans are saving money because weed management is super expensive and one of the most expensive operating costs in the farming operation. And they are helping save the environment and being environmentally friendly, using conservation tillages, which is reducing soil erosion and improving soil quality. However, there's still risks of super weeds emerging from high amounts of glyphosate-tolerant soybeans. These super weeds are becoming resistant to the herbicide as well, creating havoc among farmers that have only ever used the glyphosate-tolerant crops. There has yet to be a permanent solution to fixing these weeds being resistant. However, some farmers are using a mix of other herbicides as well as the Roundup Ready glyphosate herbicide to try to kill weeds without severely damaging their crop yield and their plants. Hopefully, in the future, there will be a new herbicide that can kill weeds but also be resistant to the crops, especially soybeans. After researching a lot about the genetic modification of soybeans, I believe that the glyphosate-tolerant soybean is very, very important in our society today. I really had no idea that humans relied so heavily on the production of soybeans. I did not know that soybeans contained oil and had such high, and were so high in protein. I also didn't know soybeans were used for cooking purposes, such as vegetable oil, and I didn't know that soybeans contributed to the biodiesel production. When I hear the word GMO, I tend to think negatively because it means it is not fully organic. It means it was genetically modified, which makes me think it's not good or healthy for me. Now that I know the demand of soybeans, I understand why the genetic modification for glyphosate was so important to this crop. Without this modification, we would be struggling in the soybean production, and our world would be hungry because we wouldn't be able to feed the amount of people we currently have on Earth. The glyphosate, I had no idea that the glyphosate-tolerant soybean helped improve the yield of the crops so heavily and helped even produce the yield of crops like corn and cotton and canola so heavily. I also didn't know that it was environmentally friendly and it saved farmers a lot of money, which is awesome. However, when you mess with the balance of nature, a negative effect is bound to happen.